There are dozens of Chinatowns all across America with interesting architecture, diverse restaurants, and specialty shops. It's no wonder they're popular with locals and tourists alike. They also provide places for new immigrants and for families to create communities. But with gentrification and all sorts of problems from the pandemic, it's no wonder that all these Chinatowns are rapidly changing. It's time to head out of Studio 1A and hit the road for a new kind of culinary adventure. Follow me as I taste some of the most iconic foods around the country and meet the families behind them. Together, we're going to learn how a good meal has the power to connect us to our past, our future, and each other. Okay, so it's no surprise. There's incredible food to be found here in Manhattan's Chinatown, folks lining up all the time. But there used to be Chinatowns in cities and towns, big and small, all across this country. In fact, the longest running family-owned Chinese restaurant is in a place you might never think of, Butte, Montana. At the turn of the century, Butte, Montana was a bustling mining town. The invention of electricity leading to a demand for conductors like copper. Mining boomed, the city flourishing. The demand for labor brought thousands of immigrants to Butte. They came from so many different countries, including Italy, Ireland, and China. It was the classic portrait of the American West, with gambling, saloons, even a red light district. By 1914, Butte's Chinatown was thriving, with over 60 Chinese-owned businesses.
Now we're going to prepare broccoli beef. My name is Jerry Tam, and I'm the owner of the Pekin Noodle Parlor.
The Pekin first opened as a tobacco shop and casino run by Jerry's great-uncle, Hum Yao. 2 years later, Hum adding a restaurant, and the Pekin Noodle Parlor was born.
This building has 3 different levels. The top level obviously is the Pekin Noodle Parlor, and then the second level on the main street used to be a herbal medicine shop.
That shop was run by Jerry's great-grandfather, Tam Kwang Yi.
It's crazy to think that, everything came over from China at one time. Like, they didn't make soy sauce in America. The noodles were fried and brought over on ships because they didn't make fresh noodles. So the history of this place really holds true that this is a Chinese restaurant, from Chinese immigrants.
I met up with culinary historian Grace Young to learn more about America's earliest Chinatown. Where was the first Chinatown and how did it get started?
The first Chinatown is San Francisco. The first Chinese came to California for the gold rush, and that was 1848. And they came because America needed cheap labor. And so from gold rush, they ended up doing farming, manufacturing, and then eventually they worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. And the first Chinatown formed because America wanted cheap labor, but they didn't want the Chinese to live with whites. So they were ostracized from white communities.
So talk to me about that first wave of Chinese immigration to the U.S.
The Chinese came from southern China, principally from the area of Canton, and there was tremendous prejudice against the Chinese. They were lynched, and because the Chinese were willing to work for lower wages, they were seen as the reason why Americans were suffering so much. So the blame was unfairly placed on the Chinese.
In 1882, Congress signed the Chinese Exclusion Act into law. It banned Chinese from migrating to the U.S. It marks the only time in American history that an entire race or ethnic group was banned from immigrating.
But the interesting thing about this Exclusion Act was that there was actually exemption for Chinese tourists, students, teachers, and also merchants.
A landmark court case in 1915 classified Chinese restaurant owners as merchants.
And it gave them a way to circumvent the Exclusion Act of 1882.
It was this exemption that allowed Jerry's great-uncle to open Pekin Noodle Parlor in Butte, paving a path for more family members to immigrate to the U.S. and help the business. Jerry's father, Danny Wong, arrived in the U.S. in 1947 as a teenager.
Ever since he was 14 years old, he's been working at the Pekin Noodle Parlor, and he just started with the simple roles of washing dishes, and then he learned how to cook, and then he slowly just started integrating himself into, managing it and working with the waitresses and the staff.
Danny taking over the restaurant in the 1950s, spending years turning it into a pillar of the local community.
Well, I've been coming here for at least 50 years. They give me plenty of food. I never walk away hungry.
I love coming to work because of all the people I work with. Like, they choose really nice people. And
my father probably employed over 10,000 people at this, throughout his whole entire life. So it's interesting to know that there's nearly 5 to 6 generations of people that, have worked here.
The menu at Pekin Noodle Parlor hasn't changed much over the years.
We do a thing called chop suey. And what chop suey is tidbits of leftover vegetables that were kind of mixed together in its own gravy and served on top of chow mein noodles. We've been serving it for over 110 years.
Chop suey is in large part why Chinese food became so popular across the United States.
Chop suey was the first time America experienced a culinary craze, a food craze. And it's starting at the end of the 19th century that there are Americans who are venturing into Chinatown. The way they got them to even experiment with Chinese food was to make a stir fry that was actually quite bland. So they used bamboo shoots, water chestnuts, onions, oftentimes there was celery.
For many years, Chinatowns were the only places where non-Chinese Americans could sample Asian flavors.
Americans were going into Chinatown, some were curious, they wanted to experience curio shops, Chinese operas.
With increased tourism, Chinatowns in large cities grew, but it was a different story in Montana. Like many mining towns, Butte lost many of its workers as production slowed in the 1950s.
Once the copper ran dry, then the people started to pick up and just kind of move on and move back to their families and the bigger states.
As miners left Butte for new opportunities, its Chinatown disappeared. In the early 1900s, there were 7 chop suey restaurants listed in the Butte City Directory. Today, only the Pekin Noodle Parlor remains open. Jerry Tam runs the Pekin Noodle Parlor in Butte, Montana.
People may know this is the oldest Chinese restaurant in America, but below it is so much history.
Despite Pekin's historic status, Jerry says he was never pressured by family to join the business.
I never learned to cook until I came back in around 2009, because like any Asian American, my parents wanted all of their kids to go to college, so we all went to colleges around the nation and to get a better education, to become a lawyer, a doctor, and what have you. But I went into fashion, and what was great about that is I got to see the world because of it.
In 2004, Jerry even appearing on Bravo's Project Runway. But a few years later, family duty calling him home.
And unfortunately, my mom had a stroke, so my dad needed help, taking care of her and taking care of the restaurant. I think it was really hard on my father because they were in a generation where they loved each other every day, and they were just best friends.
After Jerry's mom passed, Jerry and his dad began operating Pekin together.
He never stopped working, so he was working here all the way until 85, until he couldn't make up the stairs anymore. My father and I spent every day together. I made sure he was healthy all the way till the end, the best of my ability I can do. My father passed in November, and it was really, heartbreaking. He didn't want to say goodbye to my sisters or me or this restaurant or the community. He loved Butte, Montana.
Jerry now runs Pekin Noodle Parlor with his cousin Nelson. Together, they're working to preserve a family legacy and keep a piece of Chinese American history alive in an unlikely place.
I've been asked the question, what is the future of the Pekin? And the best answer I can give you is, let's just keep it the same. Let's not change anything, because that's what people come here for. They need to have their parking spots, they have their booths, they have their favorite place to sit at the bar. I don't think they want any change, because this is a place that feels like home.
While New York City is home to America's largest Chinatown, the honor of the oldest goes to San Francisco, and that's where the Far East Cafe is located. It is one of the last remaining historic Chinese banquet halls. After a 2-year hiatus, this celebrated venue hosted the 64th annual Miss Chinatown USA pageant, a Lunar New Year tradition. The occasion marking a triumphant milestone for this century-old institution. Bill Lee has owned the Far East Cafe since 1999. His daughter Kathy working by his side as the manager.
He brought me into the restaurant to kind of understand the roots of our culture. He wanted me to remember that, Chinatown is about community, is about traditions, is about culture.
For many in the community, Chinese banquet halls are more than just venues for special events.
I feel that Far East is kind of like a second home for, a lot of our patrons that come in because they feel so comfortable. So much history and so many memories, A lot of patrons that have been here, they told me, they're like, oh, my parents had my red egg ginger party. It's very similar to like a baptism. And that was like 50-something years ago.
And that history is everywhere you look at Far East.
The ceilings, like my dad mentioned, the high ceilings, the moldings are all original. And the lanterns were all imported from China in the 1920s. So they're over 100 plus years old.
For the last few decades, there were 5 giant banquet-style restaurants in San Francisco's Chinatown. But with rising rents and gentrification, most have since closed their doors. By early 2020, only 2 banquet halls remained.
The Far East Cafe planned to celebrate its 100-year anniversary with a big celebration. Instead, it's now planning to close its doors.
At the start of the pandemic, the restaurant stayed afloat by cooking meals for senior citizens and low-income residents in Chinatown.
We applied for a PPP loan, and we got over $200,000. We also received money from the feed and fuel program. Then our landlord gave us 6 months of free rent.
Beyond COVID, a different type of virus brought more harm to Chinatowns across the country. Anti-Asian hate crimes soaring by nearly 340% in 2021.
When this started happening, I felt very, very sad and also very angry because I'm like, why is this happening to Chinatown? Why is it happening to our community? For these people to target elderly people, to push them down, to rob them, don't they realize that they have grandparents too, or they have parents that are that age? And if that happened to their parents, how would they feel?
People saw the attacks when they watched the news and heard reports, and they got even more scared. They don't want to go out, even for special events like the Mid-Autumn Festival. We tried to invite them, but they didn't want to come.
We used to be open until 10 o'clock before pandemic. Sometimes we would stay out here until midnight if we had events. Now, we can't do that. We changed the business hours to close at 7:30, because safety is the most important thing.
Business owners across Chinatown still face hostility. George and Cindy Chen opened China Live in 2017.
We've been lucky. We've only had a couple of instances where, people scream anti-Asian slurs. And we're concerned about our employees, coming to work and being harassed. I think that ignorance is very unfortunate.
China Live is a massive marketplace with multiple restaurants. It's in a building that once housed a banquet hall like Far East.
I remember coming to a wedding here when I was in college, and there were, I think literally 5,000 people in like 6 restaurants. But unfortunately, real estate was getting very expensive, so it's not very cost effective if you don't have that business.
But 2 years ago, the couple had to lay off 200 workers. However, with the support of partners, George and Cindy were able to pivot their business on a few fronts.
We did, the ghost kitchen was selling outside our box. So we have 10 locations in the Bay Area, from San Jose to Berkeley, and they can order food from those ghost kitchens.
Ghost kitchens prepare restaurant-quality food exclusively for delivery or takeout.
We sold so many Peking ducks, we didn't know what to do with all the duck fat. So what do? You make popcorn with it. So that's why we have a duck fat popcorn.
As business picked up, China Live was able to rehire 100 workers. Despite an uncertain future, these restaurants remain hopeful that business will rebound.
More police presence. People are more, as a community, standing up for ourselves, making sure that we have like the buddy system, making sure that we're together and we feel safe, that we're walking together, that we have each other's back.
I mean, dining out is an essential part of life, right? I mean, what more fun is to look forward to having dinner with friends you haven't seen at a new place or an old favorite place.
But some old favorites just can't be replaced.
During the pandemic, many restaurants have shut down. Far East is now the biggest restaurant in Chinatown. If Far East closes, there won't be space big enough to host large events for the community.
We were overjoyed having that Miss Chinatown USA event here, a press conference, and just being able to reconnect with the community. It warmed my heart. And my dad was just like so overjoyed that people were coming in just to celebrate.
To learn more about the future of Chinese American restaurants, I went to visit Chef Lucas Sin in New York City. This savvy chef is on a mission to save mom and pop shops from closing and putting a spin on the classics. Hey, nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
All right, can't wait to talk and taste.
Come in here.
Lucas was born and raised in Hong Kong. Growing up, he had never heard of dishes like General Tso's chicken. What was your first experience with Chinese American food?
Yeah.
And did you go, what the heck is this?
I was here for summer camp, and on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock or so, right before bedtime, this van would pull up in the front of the school, and you could pick between sesame chicken, General Tso's chicken, orange chicken with broccoli and fried rice or white rice or whatever it was. The first thought was that this is ridiculously delicious, where has this been my whole life? And the second thought is that what in the world is the difference between orange chicken and General Tso's chicken and sesame chicken? Why is there so much that I don't understand about this if last time I checked it was Chinese?
Lucas actually studied cognitive science at Yale, but he always had a passion for cooking. His summers spent training in award-winning restaurants in Hong Kong and Japan. After graduating in 2015, Lucas opened his first restaurant with Yale classmate Yang Zhao. Junzi Kitchen is a fast casual chain that serves modern Chinese fare. But Lucas remained passionate about the Chinese American cuisine he first tasted as a boy. So how did Chinese American food, the food that we have become familiar with, how did that develop? How did that happen?
Now, Chinese takeout is interesting, right, because it's all over the United States.
So these folks come in, they apprentice in a restaurant, they learn those recipes, and
they
then
go
move
somewhere
on
else, right?
To open their own
exactly.
restaurant.
And then their cousins come from Fujian, and then those recipes are passed on. And there's a remarkable similarity to these dishes.
Despite the popularity of Chinese American food, many family-owned restaurants that once dotted Chinatowns and other urban areas have been closing for years.
Opening restaurants is really difficult, and running restaurants is perhaps even more difficult. These moms and dads open these restaurants so that their kids can go to university and become lawyers and doctors and television hosts and whatnot. And now they're finally able to do that. They don't need to run these restaurants anymore, right? Suddenly livelihoods have changed. That's a good thing.
Lucas and Young hatched an idea to help smaller businesses in 2019. Nice Day seeks out restaurants facing closure, then works with the owners to remodel the space and update the menus. The pandemic stalled the team's initial plans, but the second location in Long Island is slated to open this spring.
It's important to me that these new Chinese American takeout restaurants that we're building called Nice Day, work with the previous generation of owners because they have a lot of knowledge that we don't. They know their customers, they know what sells, they know how to cook these dishes, they have recipes.
You raise an interesting point, Lucas, in that you talk to these retired Chinese restaurant owners. Is that part of the sense of trying to memorialize what could be lost?
Now, preserving recipes is part of it, but the other important part is preserving the way business is done. Chinese takeout restaurants are one of the few restaurants in the world that if they're open from, let's say, 11 to 10, the work hours are 11 to 10. They don't have any prep hours. The same cooks that do the wok stir fries are also prepping during the day. It's ridiculously efficient, and it's got to do with the setup and the way that the kitchens are run, but it's also important to us that we give back to this last generation and that we can make sure that owners who want to retire can retire well, and that legacy can be preserved in a new type of American Chinese takeout restaurant.
While Nice Day pays homage to popular Chinese-American recipes, Lucas has been celebrated for his innovative fusion dishes. In 2021, he was named one of Food and Wine's best new chefs.
We serve a Mapo mac and cheese here, which is a variation on that dish. It's fusion-y and it's silly and it's just an attempt to do something ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. It betrays every chef sensibility that I have, but unfortunately it's delicious and it's interesting and it gets people talking.
Finally, it's time to eat. Lucas showing me how to make his signature dish. How do we get started?
So the Mapo mac and cheese, the mac and the cheese elements are rigorously American. This is elbow macaroni,
right?
Cooked halfway, and this is Velveeta. But the Mapo element is going to be in the form of a Mapo sauce, if you will. The last two elements that really sort of take this over the edge is Chinese sausage.
Oh.
It can function like bacon, and some dried shiitake mushrooms that we've rehydrated. So to start off with, we're just going to cut a couple of things. And this tofu we will then put into the deep fryer.
This concludes the chopping portion of our program. Next, garlic and ginger are cooked till fragrant. Then, spicy bean paste and soybean paste are added to start the sauce. Mushroom broth is added. The mixture brought to a boil so the flavors infuse. Can I give that a try?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, here you go. So your left hand's on the wok? Yeah.
Yes. I can't get any altitude on this thing. Nothing's coming up. And that's why the pros do it, baby.
At this point, everything's smelling quite good. So the macaroni is going to go in, as well as the soup we just made. Once it's boiling and happy, 2 slices of the best
Velveeta
American cheese. Wait for that Velveeta to melt. You see that sauce is already beautifully tied together. We like to plate this dish in the Chinese takeout box.
Oh, wow.
Because it's silly.
Why not? It's fun. Boom.
Some fried tofu puffs as croutons go over the top. That's a little bit of texture and the homage to the original Mapo tofu. These fresh scallions are actually really important because they cut through the heaviness of the original dish.
Wow. There's a little spice, the creaminess, the crunch of the tofu.
I hope you get a little bit of the Chinese sausage, yeah.
Whoa, you've never had mac and cheese like this. Amid a global pandemic, changing family dynamics, and anti-Asian racism, Chinatowns across America and the communities that sustain them face a challenging road ahead.
Every business that is open right now is still fighting for its life. And I think that the best way to fight the anti-Asian hate is to show our love for the community. Come to Chinatown or your local Asian American Pacific Islander restaurant, store, market. Give them your business. We have lost so much during the pandemic, and I think it makes us all so much more conscious that we have to protect what we love.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Find your favorite recipes, celebrity interviews, uplifting stories, shop our favorite deals, and so much more with the Today app. Download it now.